I woke up in the hospital with no memory of how I got there, and a detective standing at the foot of my bed, asking me why I tried to kill myself. I didn't, I whispered. My throat raw. My head pounding. The fluorescent lights were too bright, making my eyes water. Or maybe that was the tears. I couldn't tell anymore. Miss Vance. We found you in your car at the bottom of Morrison Bridge. Your vehicle went through the guardrail. If that fisherman hadn't seen you go over, you'd be dead. Detective Morrison's voice was gentle but firm. He was a broad man in his 50s with kind eyes that had seen too much. The brake lines were cut, completely severed. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a suicide attempt. Someone tried to murder you. I tried to sit up, but pain shot through my ribs. Everything came flooding back. The courthouse. The hearing. My father's cold smile as Judge Thorne ruled against me. And then, driving home in the rain, pressing the brake pedal as I approached the bridge, and feeling nothing. No resistance. No stopping. Just the horrible realization that I was going too fast. The guardrail was coming up, and I was about to die. Who, I managed to ask, though I already knew the answer. That's what we're trying to figure out. Morrison pulled a chair closer to my bed and sat down. But I need to know what you were going to testify about tomorrow. The inheritance case. Your father. Judge Thorne. I need to know everything. Because whoever did this is still out there. And they're going to try again. Before I could answer, my hospital room door burst open. A woman in her 70s rushed in, her face stricken with terror and guilt. Mrs. Eleanor Caldwell. My neighbor. The woman who had barely spoken to me in 30 years. Grabbed my hand with fingers that trembled like autumn leaves. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I should have warned you sooner. I was afraid. I've been afraid for 10 years. Ever since your mother. But I can't stay silent anymore. They killed Sarah. They killed your grandfather. And now they're trying to kill you. She looked at Detective Morrison, then back at me, her eyes wild with decades of suppressed truth. Your father and Judge Thorne, they've been doing this for years, silencing anyone who threatens them. And I have proof. I've always had proof. I was just too much of a coward to use it. The machines around me started beeping faster as my heart rate spiked. My mother hadn't died in a boating accident. My grandfather hadn't died of old age. They were murdered. And I was supposed to be next. How long do I have? I asked Morrison, my voice steadier than I felt. Until what? Until they try again. Until my father realizes I survived. Until Judge Thorne decides a hospital isn't secure enough to keep me alive. Morrison's expression darkened. We're posting an officer outside your door. But Miss Vance, if what Mrs. Caldwell is saying is true, if this goes as high as she claims, I don't know who we can trust. Half the police force plays golf with your father. Judge Thorne has connections throughout the department. Mrs. Caldwell squeezed my hand tighter. There's something else. Something you need to see before tomorrow's hearing. Your grandfather left you evidence. Real evidence. It's hidden in his house. In a place only someone who truly knew him would think to look. He told me where it was the week before he died. Made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would make sure you found it. But you have to get out of here. Tonight. They won't wait for you to recover. She can't leave, Morrison protested. She has a concussion. 3 broken ribs. And she almost drowned. Medically speaking, she needs to stay here for at least 48 hours. I looked at the IV in my arm, the monitors tracking my vitals, the hospital gown that made me feel vulnerable and weak. Then I looked at Mrs. Caldwell's terrified face and thought about my mother's body being pulled from the Ashley River. My grandfather collapsing in his study. The doctors calling it a heart attack, but never ordering an autopsy. The brake lines on my car. Severed clean through. Detective Morrison, I said, pulling the IV from my arm despite the pain. In 48 hours. I'll either be dead, or my father will have destroyed every piece of evidence that could convict him. So I'm leaving. Tonight. With or without your help. The detective stared at me for a long moment. Then he did something that probably violated every regulation in his department handbook. He stood up, walked to the door, checked the hallway, and came back. There's a service elevator at the end of the east wing. No cameras. If you were to leave in the next 20 minutes, during shift change, hypothetically, no one would notice until morning rounds. But I never told you that. He handed me a business card. My personal cell is on the back. When you find whatever your grandfather left you, you call me. Not the station. Me directly. And Miss Vance stay alive long enough to testify. Whatever corruption your family has uncovered, it dies with you if you don't make it to that courtroom. If this story of corruption, murder, and one woman's fight for justice has you hooked, please hit that like button right now. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. And comment below telling me if you'd have the courage to fight back against this kind of power. Your engagement helps these stories reach people who need to hear them. Now let me take you back to where this nightmare truly began. 3 months before someone tried to kill me. To the day I discovered my entire life had been built on lies. 6 months earlier, I had been sitting in the lawyer's office, still numb from my grandfather William Vance's funeral. The mahogany desk between us seemed to stretch for miles as David Chen, a young attorney fresh out of law school but sharp as a tack, slid the original will across to me. My grandfather had been clear. Vance Marine Logistics, the shipping company he had built from nothing over 40 years, was to be mine. Not my father's. Mine. Your grandfather was very specific. Charlotte, David said, his voice gentle but professional. He wanted you to have full control. He said you understood the business, that you cared about the employees, that you had integrity. He paused, adjusting his glasses. He also left this note. It's sealed. He instructed me to give it to you privately. My hand shook as I broke the wax seal. A family tradition my grandfather had never abandoned. The handwriting was unmistakably his, still strong despite his age. Charlotte, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I pray you never need what I'm about to tell you. Your father is not the man he pretends to be. He has used the Vance name to buy influence, to corrupt good people, to twist the law itself. I have protected you from him as long as I could, but now you must protect yourself. Trust no one in power. They have been bought. If my will is challenged, look for the truth. Where the water meets the land, the Ashley River never forgets. Your mother knew. That's why she's gone. I'm sorry I couldn't save her. Please, save yourself. Grandpa. I read it 3 times before the words truly sank in. My mother. The official report had said her death 10 years ago was a boating accident. Her sailboat had capsized on the Ashley River during a storm. They found her body 3 days later. I was only 19. Devastated. And I had believed what they told me because why wouldn't I? But now, sitting in that lawyer's office with my grandfather's warning burning in my hands, pieces started clicking into place. The way my father had insisted on a quick, private funeral. The way he had sold her belongings before I could go through them. The way he never, ever talked about her. Miss Vance. Charlotte. David's voice pulled me back. Are you all right? I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. When is the will reading? Next week. But Charlotte, I need to warn you. Your father has already hired representation. Maxwell and Sterling. They're expensive. Aggressive. And they don't lose often. I should have been more prepared. I should have known my father wouldn't go quietly. Arthur Vance had always been a man who believed the world owed him everything. Growing up, I watched him charm business partners over dinner while treating our household staff like servants in a medieval castle. My mother had been the buffer, the one who quietly gave the employees bonuses from her own account, who apologized for his behavior, who tried to teach me that our family name came with responsibility, not just privilege. After she died, that buffer disappeared. I went away to college, came back with a business degree, and started working at Vance Marine Logistics from the ground up. I worked in the warehouse. I learned the shipping routes. I got my hands dirty. My grandfather noticed. My father didn't. Or if he did, I didn't care. He was too busy attending charity galas and political fundraisers, making connections, building what he called his network of influence. What I didn't know then was that he was also systematically robbing the company blind. The night before the will reading, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandfather's words. Look for the truth where the water meets the land. At 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep, got dressed, and drove to the old family house on the Ashley River. My grandfather had left it to me too, though I hadn't moved in yet. It had been empty since his death. Waiting, the house loomed against the dark sky, its white columns ghostly in the moonlight. I let myself in with the key David had given me. Everything was covered in white sheets, furniture sleeping like forgotten memories. I wandered through rooms filled with my childhood, past the kitchen where my grandmother had taught me to make biscuits, past the library where my grandfather had told me stories of his early days in shipping. Struggling to make a name for himself after returning from the Navy, that's when I saw it. The painting. My mother's favorite. A watercolor of the Ashley River at sunset. My grandfather had commissioned it for her 30th birthday. I remembered her telling me once that she had asked the artist to hide something in it, a secret just for her. I took it down from the wall, my heart pounding. Behind it, carved into the wood paneling, was a small indentation. I pressed it. A section of the wall clicked open, revealing a safe I never knew existed. The combination came to me like muscle memory. My mother's birthday. Reversed. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside was a USB drive, a stack of old photographs, and a journal. My mother's journal. I sank to the floor right there and started reading by the light of my phone. The entry started 10 years ago, just months before she died. She had discovered what my father was doing. The bribes, the falsified shipping manifests, the money being funneled into offshore accounts. She had been gathering evidence, planning to turn him in, to save the company before he destroyed it completely. The last entry was dated 2 days before her death. Arthur knows, I know. He's threatening me, saying I'll destroy the family name if I go to the authorities. But I can't let him continue. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with someone who can help, a prosecutor who can't be bought. Arthur doesn't know about the backup evidence I've hidden. If something happens to me, William knows where to look. Charlotte, if you're reading this, I'm so sorry. I thought I could fix this without you ever having to know. Your father is dangerous. Please, be careful. I love you more than life itself. Mom. I sat on that dusty floor and cried for the first time since her funeral. All these years, I had mourned an accident. Now I was mourning a murder. The will reading was a circus. My father arrived with 3 lawyers, all in expensive suits, all wearing the same predatory smile. I had David, who looked like he might throw up from nerves, and my mother's journal hidden in my purse like a loaded gun. I wasn't sure how to fire. Judge Marcus Green presided over the reading. A stern man in his 60s who I later learned played golf with my father every Sunday. The will was read. Everything to me. The company, the house, the accounts. My father stood up immediately. I'm contesting this will on the grounds that my father was not of sound mind when he wrote it, and that my daughter has been manipulating him for years to cut me out of my rightful inheritance. The room exploded with objections from David, counter-arguments from my father's legal team, and the sharp crack of Judge Green's gavel. What I didn't know then was that this was just the opening act. 2 weeks later, I discovered the first real blow. I arrived at the Vance Marine Logistics office to meet with the accounting department, ready to begin my transition into leadership. The head accountant, a nervous man named Timothy Ross, who had worked for my grandfather for 20 years, met me at the door with his face ashen. Miss Vance? I need to show you something. I've been trying to reach you, but your phone. I checked my cell. Dead. I had forgotten to charge it the night before, too consumed with reading more of my mother's journal. What's wrong? Timothy. He led me to his office, closed the door, and pulled up account records on his computer. In the last 6 months, there have been massive transfers out of the company operating accounts. Over $3 million. The digital signatures show they were authorized by you. My blood ran cold. That's impossible. I didn't authorize anything. I didn't even have access to those accounts until the will was read. I know, Timothy said quietly. That's why I'm telling you. Someone has been using your digital identity. They've been very careful, very sophisticated. But Miss Vance, if the court sees this during the inheritance dispute, he didn't need to finish. It would look like I had been stealing from the company, manipulating my grandfather. Exactly what my father was accusing me of. I called David immediately from Timothy's office phone. He arrived within an hour. and what he told me made everything worse. Charlotte, your father has filed an emergency motion. He's claiming that you're actively embezzling from the company and that he needs to be appointed temporary administrator to prevent further damage. The hearing is tomorrow. Judge Elias Thorne is presiding. Who? Judge Thorne. He's... David hesitated. He's known for being tough but fair. That's what his reputation says. Anyway, what David didn't know, what I was about to discover, was that Judge Elias Thorne was my father's best friend from law school. A connection that had been carefully omitted from public records. The anonymous letter arrived that night. Slipped under my door while I was trying to prepare for the hearing. Plain white paper. Printed text. No signature. Judge Thorne and Arthur Vance have been friends for 30 years. Thorne owes Arthur for covering up a scandal in 2003. The courthouse is bought. Your mother knew. That's why she's dead. Check the sailboat maintenance records from the marina. Someone tampered with her boat the day before she died. The mechanic who knew is named Daniel Albright. He used to work for your father. Now he's terrified. Find him. Trust Mrs. Caldwell next door. She knows more than she said. She was there. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. I read it 5 times. Then, I did something I should have done the moment my grandfather died. I went next door. Eleanor Caldwell opened her door with the chain still attached, her eye visible through the gap. Miss Vance. It's very late. Mrs. Caldwell. I need to talk to you. Please. It's about my mother. The eye disappeared. For a moment, I thought she would close the door. Then I heard the chain sliding, and the door opened fully. She looked older than I remembered, frailer, as if the years had been catching up with her all at once. Come in, she whispered. Quickly. Her house was immaculate. Every surface dusted. Every photograph perfectly aligned. She led me to her living room and sat down heavily in an armchair, gesturing for me to sit across from her. I've been waiting for you to come, she said quietly. For 10 years. I've been waiting. But I'm a coward. Charlotte. I'm an old, frightened coward. What do you know about my mother? Mrs. Caldwell's hands twisted in her lap. I was a court stenographer for 35 years. I worked in Judge Thorne's courtroom. I saw things, heard things. Your father and Judge Thorne. They have an arrangement. Cases get decided before they're heard. Evidence disappear. Witnesses change their stories. And my mother, she came to me 3 days before she died. She knew I worked in the courthouse. She asked me if I knew anyone honest, anyone who couldn't be bought. I gave her a name. A prosecutor from Columbia. Someone outside the local system. Mrs. Caldwell's eyes filled with tears. 2 days later, she was dead. And the prosecutor I recommended, he dropped the investigation before it even started. Someone got to him too. Why didn't you come forward? Because I was afraid Judge Thorne called me into his chambers the day after your mother's funeral. He told me he knew what Sarah and I had discussed. He told me that accidents happen to people who can't keep their mouths shut. He told me about my daughter in Atlanta. My grandchildren. He knew their school. Charlotte. He knew their daily routes. She was crying now. Years of guilt pouring out. I have lived with that shame every day. When your grandfather died, I thought about coming to you. But I was still so afraid. I knelt beside her chair and took her shaking hands. I need your help now. Mrs. Caldwell, I need you to testify about what you know. They'll destroy me. They'll destroy me if you don't. Please, help me finish what my mother started. She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something change in her eyes. A decision being made, a line being crossed. There's something else. I have a recording from 2003. The case Judge Thorne was presiding over, the one your father helped cover up. It was a corruption case involving a city council member and kickbacks from a construction company. Your father was the construction company's lawyer. The council member agreed to testify against his clients in exchange for immunity. The night before he was supposed to testify, Judge Thorne called your father. I was working late, finishing transcripts. I heard them on the phone in the judge's chambers. They didn't know I was there. She stood up. went to an old secretary desk in the corner, and pulled out a small USB drive. I recorded it on my personal device. I've kept it all these years, thinking someday I might be brave enough to use it. I think that day is now. The emergency hearing the next morning was everything David had warned me about, and worse. Judge Elias Thorne sat behind the bench like a king on a throne, his expression carved from granite. He was tall, imposing, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that assessed me like I was something unpleasant he had found on his shoe. My father sat with his legal team, looking appropriately concerned and wounded. He had perfected the performance of the betrayed parent, the grieving son trying to save his father's legacy from an ungrateful, manipulative daughter. His lead attorney, Martin Sterling, stood to present their case. Your Honor, we have documentation showing that Miss Charlotte Vance has been systematically embezzling from Vance Marine Logistics for the past 6 months. Digital signatures, transfer records, email communications requesting these transfers. Furthermore, we have witnesses who will testify that Miss Vance was observed pressuring her grandfather in the months before his death, isolating him from family members, and creating an environment where he felt compelled to change his will in her favor. David shot to his feet. Objection. These are serious allegations without substantiation. We haven't been provided with any discovery materials to verify these claims. Judge Thorne's voice was ice. Overruled. This is an emergency hearing. Mr. Chen, standard discovery timelines don't apply. Continue. Mr. Sterling. Sterling smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. We call Ryan Thorne to the stand. A young man in his late 20s approached the witness stand. I recognized him from news articles. Ryan Thorne, the judge's nephew, a computer forensics expert who had testified in several high-profile cases. He was sworn in and took his seat, not looking at me once. Mr. Thorne, you've examined the digital records from Vance Marine Logistics. Can you explain what you found? Ryan's voice was professional, almost robotic. The transfer records show a pattern consistent with embezzlement. The digital signatures are authenticated and match Miss Vance's credentials. The timing of the transfers correlates with her increased access to company systems after her grandfather's health began declining. In your professional opinion, is it possible these records were falsified? Anything is technically possible. But these particular records show no signs of manipulation. They appear genuine. I felt David tense beside me. We both knew what this was. A setup, executed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone who had the technical skills to create false digital signatures that would pass forensic examination. The hearing continued for 3 hours. My father took the stand, tears in his eyes, describing how his daughter had become distant after college, how she had worked her way into his father's confidence, how he had watched helplessly as I poisoned William Vance's mind against his own son. I loved my father, Arthur said, his voice breaking. And I love my daughter. But I cannot stand by and watch her destroy everything my father built. The company is losing money. Employees are being laid off. And Charlotte has been transferring funds to offshore accounts that we can't trace. I'm begging the court to intervene before there's nothing left to save. It was a masterclass in manipulation. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed him myself. When it was my turn to speak, David wisely kept it brief. I explained that I had never authorized any transfers, that I had only recently gained access to company accounts, and that I believed I was being framed. Judge Thorne listened with an expression that suggested he was considering what to have for lunch. Not the testimony that would determine my future. His ruling was swift and brutal. Based on the evidence presented, I'm appointing Arthur Vance as temporary administrator of Vance Marine Logistics, pending a full hearing on the validity of William Vance's will. Miss Charlotte Vance is hereby restricted from accessing company accounts or facilities until this matter is resolved. We'll reconvene in 30 days. The gavel fell like a guillotine. I walked out of that courthouse feeling like I had been hit by a truck. David was apologetic, scrambling to figure out our next move. But I barely heard him. All I could think about was my mother's journal, her warning about my father being dangerous, and Mrs. Caldwell's frightened face when she talked about what Thorne had threatened. That's when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. A text message. They're going to swap out the hard drive with the original transfer records during the lunch recess tomorrow. Second floor storage room. 1, 2, 1, 5 p.m. If you want proof of the forgery, be there. Come alone. I stared at the message for a long moment, then showed it to David. It could be a trap, he said. Of course it's a trap, but what choice do I have? That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept going over everything in my mind, trying to figure out who might be helping me and why. The anonymous letter, the text message. Someone inside the system was taking enormous risks. At midnight, there was a soft knock on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Ryan Thorne standing on my porch. Looking terrified, I opened the door with the chain attached, just as Mrs. Caldwell had. What do you want? To help you. His voice was barely above a whisper. Can I come in, please? They're watching my apartment. I had to drive around for an hour to make sure I wasn't followed. Every instinct told me not to trust him. He had just testified against me under oath. But something about his fear seemed genuine. I opened the door. Ryan came inside and immediately moved away from the windows. I need you to know that everything I said today was a lie. The signatures are fake. I created them. You what? Your father hired me 6 months ago. He said it was for a family matter, that you were mentally unstable and trying to steal from the company, and that he needed documentation to support getting you psychiatric help. He showed me medical records, prescription bottles with your name, doctor's notes about your condition. Ryan ran his hands through his hair. It all looked real. I believed him. I created the false digital trail he asked for. It wasn't until I heard your testimony today that I realized what he was really doing. Why should I believe you? Because I'm the one who sent you that text message. And because I have copies of everything? The original files showing the forgeries, emails from your father instructing me on exactly what he needed, payment records showing he paid me through a shell corporation so it couldn't be traced back to him. He pulled out his own USB drive. It's all here. Everything you need to prove your innocence. And your uncle Judge Thorne. Ryan's face darkened. My uncle has been corrupt for as long as I can remember. That's why I went into computer forensics. I thought if I could be the one analyzing evidence, I could make sure the truth came out. But I was naive. He still found ways to use me. He looked at me directly. Your father has something on him. Something big. I don't know what it is, but I've heard them talk. Thorne is terrified of whatever leverage Arthur has. We spent the next 3 hours going through Ryan's files. Everything was there. The manipulation, the forgery, the conspiracy. It was perfect. Too perfect. Why are you really doing this? I asked. Ryan was quiet for a long moment. Because 6 months ago, my girlfriend left me. She said I had become someone she didn't recognize. That I was too willing to compromise my ethics for money and advancement. She was right. Today, watching you in that courtroom, seeing what my testimony did to you, I saw myself through her eyes. I didn't like what I saw. He stood to leave. I can't undo what I've done, but maybe I can help you fix it. After he left, I called David. Then I called Mrs. Caldwell. Then I spent the rest of the night preparing for war. The full hearing on the will was scheduled for 2 weeks later, but I knew we couldn't wait. Every day my father controlled the company was another day he could destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, and solidify his position. We needed to go on the offensive. David filed an emergency motion to have Judge Thorne removed from the case, citing conflict of interest. We included Mrs. Caldwell's recording from 2003, transcripts showing the relationship between Thorne and my father, and phone records proving they had been in contact before the emergency hearing. The motion hit the courthouse like a bomb. Within hours, news vans were parked outside the building. Reporters were calling my phone. Judge Thorne issued a statement denying any impropriety and calling the allegations a desperate attempt by a troubled young woman to avoid accountability. My father's response was more direct. He called me, "You've made a terrible mistake. Charlotte." His voice was cold, controlled. Nothing like the grieving, concerned father he played in court. This was the real Arthur Vance. The man my mother had feared. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. Elias and I have been friends for 30 years. We've built something larger than you can comprehend. If you continue down this path, You will lose everything. I've already lost everything that matters. I said, Mom, Grandpa, 10 years believing her death was an accident when you murdered her. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then, you can't prove that. I have her journal. I have the witness who helped her gather evidence. And I'm going to find Daniel Albright, the mechanic who tampered with her boat on your orders. Another long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Dangerous. Daniel Albright doesn't want to be found. He's made that very clear. And accidents, Charlotte, tend to run in families. You should be more careful driving. That old Honda of yours, the brakes are probably worn. It would be tragic if they failed at the wrong moment. He hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, my hands shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. Then I remembered the car that had jumped the curb the night before the first hearing. The one that had nearly killed me. That hadn't been a random drunk driver. It had been a warning. Or an attempt. I called David. We need police protection. Charlotte, we're going against a judge, and one of the most powerful men in Charleston. The local police aren't going to help. I know, but we need to document the threat, at least if something happens to me. There needs to be a record. We filed a police report that afternoon. The officer who took the report was professional but skeptical, and I could see in his eyes that he didn't believe me. Just another rich girl crying wolf, but it was on the record. And that was something. Finding Daniel Albright turned out to be easier than I expected. But getting him to talk was another matter entirely. Ryan used his contacts to track Daniel to a small town in Georgia, working at a marina under a different name. I drove down with David, both of us checking our mirrors constantly for signs we were being followed. Daniel was in his 50s now, weathered and gray, working on an engine when we found him. He looked up as we approached, and I saw recognition flash across his face, followed immediately by fear. Daniel Albright, I said. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. I don't know anyone by that name. My name is Charlotte Vance. Sarah Vance was my mother. The rag fell from his hands. You need to leave. Now. Please. I just need to know what happened. What my father made you do. He looked around the marina, checking to see if anyone was within earshot. Then he grabbed my arm and pulled me behind the building. David, following close. Your father ruined my life, Daniel said, his voice low and urgent. 10 years ago, I was the head mechanic at Charleston Harbor Marina. Your mother's sailboat came in for regular maintenance. 2 days before she died, a man approached me. He offered me $20,000 to make a small adjustment to the rudder mechanism. Said it was a prank. That he wanted to give his wife a scare on her next sail. Nothing dangerous. He showed me pictures of my kids. Knew their names. Knew what school they went to. Daniel's eyes were haunted. I did what he asked. I tampered with the rudder so it would jam in rough conditions. 2 days later, Sarah Vance was dead. Did you ever see the man again? No, but I knew who sent him. Your father came to the marina the day after the funeral. He shook my hand, thanked me for my service, and gave me another envelope. Inside was $50,000 and a plane ticket to Georgia. The message was clear. Take the money and disappear, or end up like your mother. Will you testify? Daniel laughed bitterly. And say what? That I murdered your mother? I'd be confessing to manslaughter at minimum. And I still have kids. Miss Vance. They're in college now. Doing well. I won't destroy their lives for mistakes I made a decade ago. I understood. I hated it. But I understood. What if I could promise you immunity protection? From Arthur Vance, from Judge Thorne. You can't protect me from them. Nobody can. He started to walk away, then turned back. But I kept records. Dates. Times. Descriptions of the man who approached me. Copies of the deposits to my bank account. I kept them as insurance. In case your father ever decided loose ends needed tying up. If you can guarantee my family's safety, really guarantee it, maybe we can talk. But not here. And not now. We exchanged contact information, and I promised I would find a way to protect him. I didn't know how, but I would figure it out. The drive back to Charleston was quiet. David and I were both processing what we had learned. the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place in a way that made my stomach turn. "We need federal involvement," David finally said. "This is bigger than a local inheritance dispute. Wire fraud, murder, conspiracy, judicial corruption. We need the FBI or U.S. Attorney's Office. And you think they'll take us seriously? A young lawyer and a grieving daughter making accusations against a sitting judge and a prominent businessman. Not yet. But with Ryan's evidence, Mrs. Caldwell's testimony, and Daniel's records, we might have enough to get them interested." When we got back to Charleston, there was a crowd gathered outside my house. News vans, cameras, reporters shouting questions. The story had exploded while we were gone. Someone had leaked Mrs. Caldwell's recording to the press. I pushed through the crowd with David, not answering questions, until I got inside and locked the door. My phone was ringing constantly. News outlets, lawyers offering their services, curiosity seekers. I turned it off. That's when I saw the note slipped under my door. Different paper than the first anonymous letter, but the same printed text: "Check your grandfather's study. The USB drive in his desk drawer. Password is your mother's birthday. Everything you need is there." He knew. He was gathering evidence. That's why they killed him too. I felt the room spin. My grandfather hadn't died of natural causes. He had been murdered. Just like my mother, David and I went to the old house that night, driving separately, taking different routes, paranoid that we were being watched. The study was exactly as my grandfather had left it. Books lining the walls. His reading glasses still on the desk where he had placed them the day he died. I found the USB drive exactly where the note said it would be. My mother's birthday worked as the password, and what I found inside was a complete dossier on Arthur Vance's criminal activities spanning 20 years. My grandfather had known everything. The bribery, the corruption, the money laundering through the shipping company. He had been building a case, collecting evidence, preparing to turn in his own son. The last file was dated 3 days before his death. A video recording. I clicked play. My grandfather appeared on screen, sitting in this same study, looking tired, but determined. "Charlotte, if you're watching this, then I failed. I thought I had more time. I thought I could handle this myself. Spare you the burden. But Arthur is more dangerous than I anticipated. He's threatened me. Told me that if I don't change my will back to favor him, I'll have an accident just like Sarah. I've already changed the will to protect you, so I suppose my days are numbered." He leaned forward, looking directly into the camera. "Everything you need is on this drive. Evidence of every crime Arthur has committed, every bribe he's paid, every official he's corrupted. I've also included evidence that Judge Elias Thorne has been his partner in these activities. They've been running a criminal enterprise disguised as legitimate business for 2 decades. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about your mother sooner. I was investigating her death, trying to find proof. By the time I was certain Arthur was responsible, you were away at school, building your life. I thought I could handle it, get justice for her and protect you at the same time. I was wrong." He stood up, and I could see how frail he had become in those last months. "Don't confuse revenge with justice. Charlotte, justice means following the law, exposing the truth, and letting the system work as it should. Revenge means becoming like them. You're better than that. You have your mother's heart and my stubbornness. Use both. Fight for what's right, but don't sacrifice your soul to do it. I love you. I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry I'm leaving you with this burden." The video ended. I sat in the dark study with tears streaming down my face, David's hand on my shoulder, and I made a decision. We weren't just going to win this case. We were going to burn down the entire corrupt system my father and Judge Thorne had built. The next week was a blur of activity. David brought in 2 associates from a firm in Colombia, lawyers with experience in federal corruption cases. We compiled everything into comprehensive evidence packages. Ryan provided technical analysis of the forgeries. Mrs. Caldwell gave a formal deposition about her years witnessing corruption in Judge Thorne's courtroom. I provided my mother's journal and my grandfather's files. We sent it all to the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI, the South Carolina Attorney General, and every news outlet we could find. Then we waited. The response was swift and overwhelming. Judge Thorne was placed on administrative leave, pending investigation. The State Bar opened an ethics inquiry. Federal agents descended on Vance Marine Logistics and my father's home with search warrants. The story went national. CNN covered it. The New York Times wrote an article. Suddenly, the corrupt little kingdom my father and Judge Thorne had built was exposed to sunlight. The reconvened hearing on the will was moved to a different county, assigned to a different judge. Judge Margaret Whitmore was known as a no-nonsense jurist who had zero tolerance for corruption. The courtroom was packed with reporters, court watchers, and citizens who had followed the story. My father arrived with his legal team, but they looked shell-shocked. The evidence was overwhelming. His assets had been frozen. His business partners were abandoning him. His network of influence was collapsing. The hearing lasted 3 days. We presented everything. My grandfather's video testimony, the evidence of forgery, Mrs. Caldwell's account of judicial corruption, Ryan's technical analysis and his testimony about being manipulated, Daniel Albright, granted immunity in exchange for his cooperation, testified remotely about tampering with my mother's boat. My father's lawyers tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, that there were innocent explanations. But Judge Whitmore wasn't buying it. On the third day, she called for closing arguments. David stood up, and I had never been more proud of him. The nervous young lawyer had transformed into a fierce advocate. Your Honor, this case is about more than inheritance. It's about a man who murdered his wife to cover up his crimes. A man who was prepared to murder his father for the same reason. A man who corrupted the judicial system itself to maintain power and wealth. Charlotte Vance is not asking for special treatment. She's asking for justice. Justice for her mother, justice for her grandfather, and justice for herself. When my father's lead attorney stood to respond, his arguments felt hollow. How could you defend the indefensible? Judge Whitmore took 2 hours to deliberate. When she returned, her face was grave. In my 30 years on the bench, I have never encountered a case that so thoroughly demonstrates the corruption of both personal and institutional integrity. The evidence presented shows a pattern of criminal behavior spanning 2 decades, culminating in 2 murders and an elaborate scheme to defraud Charlotte Vance of her rightful inheritance. She looked directly at my father. Mr. Vance, you will face separate criminal proceedings for your actions. But in the matter before this court, I find the will of William Vance to be valid and executed with full mental capacity. Charlotte Vance is hereby declared the rightful owner of Vance Marine Logistics and all associated assets. Furthermore, I am recommending that the federal authorities expand their investigation to include the circumstances surrounding Sarah Vance's death and William Vance's death. The gavel came down. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then the courtroom erupted. My father stood, his face red with rage. You can't do this. I built that company, I made it what it is. No, Judge Whitmore said coldly. William Vance built that company. You nearly destroyed it. Remove him from my courtroom. As the bailiffs escorted him out, my father looked at me with pure hatred. This isn't over. Charlotte. You hear me, this isn't over. But it was. And we both knew it. The next 6 months were a whirlwind. My father was indicted on 18 federal charges, including wire fraud, money laundering, bribery, and conspiracy to commit murder. Judge Thorne faced similar charges and was disbarred. Ryan Thorne, granted immunity for his cooperation, left Charleston and started a new life somewhere out west. Mrs. Caldwell became a celebrated whistleblower, speaking at legal ethics conferences about the importance of standing up to corruption even when it's dangerous. Daniel Albright was granted immunity and testified at both trials. His testimony, combined with the forensic evidence we had gathered, was damning. My father's defense crumbled. He was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. Judge Thorne received 20 years. I took over Vance Marine Logistics. But the first thing I did was change the name to Vance Legacy. Honoring my grandfather and mother, I brought in new management, implemented ethics policies, and turned the company into something they would have been proud of. I established the Sarah Vance Foundation to support women entrepreneurs and provide resources for people dealing with domestic financial abuse. Mrs. Caldwell became the honorary chairwoman. Her courage, inspiring everyone who heard her story. 1 year after the trial, I received a letter from my father. The envelope was thick, the letter inside written in his own hand, not the typed legal documents I had been receiving. I almost threw it away without reading it, but something made me open it. The letter was 20 pages long, rambling, full of justifications and excuses. But buried in the middle was something I never expected to read. I am sorry for what I did to your mother. She was a good woman, and she deserved better. I convinced myself that protecting the business, protecting my reputation, was worth any price. I was wrong. I destroyed the best thing in my life, and I destroyed you in the process. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I am proud of what you've done with the company. You are more like your mother than you know, and more like your grandfather. They would be proud of you too. I hope someday you can find peace with what happened. I never will. Arthur. I read the letter once. Then I carried it out to the patio of the old house on the Ashley River. I built a small fire in the fire pit, the same one where my grandfather used to roast marshmallows with me when I was a child. I watched the letter burn, the paper curling and blackening, the words disappearing into ash and smoke. I forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because carrying that anger was like drinking poison and expecting him to die. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean trusting. It didn't mean welcoming him back into my life. It meant letting go of the rage that had been consuming me, so I could focus on building something better. I stood on the dock that evening, watching the Ashley River flow past, the same river that had taken my mother from me. The sun was setting, painting the water gold and orange and deep purple. I thought about her journal, her bravery in standing up to my father even knowing the danger. I thought about my grandfather's video, his wisdom about not confusing justice with revenge. A new stone monument stood in the town square now, dedicated to whistleblowers and those who fight corruption. The inscription read, "The best inheritance is not wealth, but the courage to protect what is right." I had learned that truth the hard way. I had lost my mother, my grandfather, and 10 years of my life to lies and manipulation. But I had gained something too, a clarity of purpose, a understanding of my own strength, and a commitment to make sure that their deaths meant something. The legacy they left me wasn't money or property or a company name. It was the knowledge that justice is worth fighting for. Even when the system is rigged against you, that truth matters. Even when lies are easier. That standing up to power, even when you're afraid, is the only way to create real change. My phone buzzed. A text from David. "Board meeting tomorrow at 9. We're finally back in the black." "You did it." I smiled, looking out at the darkening water. "No, I didn't do it. We did it. My mother started it by refusing to stay silent. My grandfather continued it by gathering the evidence. Mrs. Caldwell took the risk of coming forward. Ryan chose to do the right thing despite the cost. Daniel found the courage to testify. And I finished what they started. The river kept flowing, carrying away the past, bringing in the future. And I stood there, finally at peace, finally free. The best inheritance isn't wealth. It's the courage to protect what's right. And the knowledge that no matter how powerful the corruption, truth will always find a way to surface. Like a river that can't be stopped. Justice flows forward, wearing down even the hardest stone, carving out a path towards something better. Would you let corruption go unchallenged if it meant protecting yourself? What would you sacrifice to expose the truth? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that one person can make a difference, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach people who need to hear them. Thank you for listening to my journey. May you never need the courage I had to find, but if you do, I hope my story gives you strength.